I guess Corky's got or Pat's got some frustration about the whole changeover. And I don't.
Russell's.
Yeah, I don't know for sure, but they had said that they were going to keep the name for a period of time, and I guess they've already changed signs. And
That's what I've heard.
Russell's, the restaurant out here, they sold
Russell sold?
to Truckers America.
Yeah. Oh.
They'll still have a
Good food they had.
I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Supposedly they're supposed to keep the same cooks and all, but it'll depend on whether they stick around. You can make that promise all you want.
Austin made the remark, some of them, they didn't do a background check on them and they're letting them go. That Russell's didn't do the background check on them. Oh my goodness. But who knows?
Anyway.
If they don't get the benefits that Russell's gave them, I don't think. Like so much gas and
right.
And have
place to stay
to eat and stuff.
Right.
So, who knows what's going to happen?
Did Russell's own the little property next to it? That little that's awesome.
The trailer houses.
Yeah. So the people that live there usually were workers.
Now they also crossed the road. I don't know if they bought it, but reserved it. Eventually to put more trailers in.
But all right, let's begin. We are at Deuteronomy chapter 12. And so chapter 12 begins, these are the statutes and the rules that you shall be careful to do in the land of the Lord, the God of your fathers has given you to possess all the days that you live on the earth. Okay. So here are commandments. You shall surely destroy all the places where the nations whom you shall dispossess served their gods. Okay. So in other words, first thing is you will destroy all the idols and all the altars and all of the pagan sites. Okay. And it says on the high mountains. So if they had an altar on the top of a mountain, whether they had a mountain on a hill or whether they had had an altar under a tree.
That's not under a green tree, mine says.
Yeah, under every green tree. You shall tear down their altars and dash in pieces their pillars and burn their asherim with fire.
What's an asherim?
An asherim is a pole.
Okay.
Okay. Actually, as weird as this sounds, not exactly the same thing, but kind of on the same vein. Think of something like the Washington Monument.
Oh, okay.
The Washington Monument is made in recognition of what is called an obelisk in Egypt. Well, that was
the same principle.
Same principle. Okay. In all fairness, typically with an asherim, it's a phallic symbol.
What's phallic?
Male reproductive organ.
Oh, okay.
That's why it's a long pole. So the asherim were typically connected to the goddess Ashtaroth, who was the goddess of fertility. And so her symbol was
Awesome.
Okay. So you shall chop down the carved images of their gods and destroy their name out of that place. Okay. Then, so first destroy the idols. And then he says, you shall not worship the Lord your God in that way. Now, here is what this means. And this is an important element. You shall not just build an altar to God wherever you want to do your sacrifices. Okay. That's kind of the idea here.
Because that's what they did.
That's what the pagans did. They just built themselves an altar and had all these places. Instead, you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will choose out of all your tribes and put his name and make his habitation there. Okay.
Like make him his own house.
So at this point, it's wherever the tabernacle was.
Yes.
Okay.
Because they've been wandering and they've been carrying it with them, and
the same thing is true once they enter the land. Once they reside rest, then the tabernacle finds a home. And first it's Bethel, and then there's a couple of other places that it ends up going. Okay. But the idea is you're not to worship the Lord your God in a way that you make an altar and an idol of the Lord to worship wherever you want. Instead, you go to the place that God has chosen. Okay. There you shall go, and there you shall bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes and the contributions that you present. Okay. Your vow offerings, your free will offerings, and the firstborn of your herd and of your flock. Okay. So now understand, because this is an important, this is important. There wasn't necessarily, other than the feast days, it wasn't like you had to go to the tabernacle all the time. Okay. But if you had an offering you wanted to bring to the Lord, then you were to bring it to the tabernacle. So you might have to make a journey to go and take it to where. Okay. Now, under David really is where this becomes. Okay. Under King David, and then even more so under Solomon, when the temple is built, then Jerusalem becomes the place that God is called to put his name. Okay. In fact, when we go forward, and this is a very important element of this, okay, so to get into a little bit of history, David chooses to live in Jerusalem. He brings the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, and with it, the tabernacle. Okay. It's not entirely clear whether it's the whole tabernacle or whether he just makes a place for the Ark. Solomon builds the temple, and he spends his son. Okay. And remember that there are two reasons that David doesn't do it. David had this time in his life where I need to build God a house. I live in a house and God has a tent.
Yeah.
And God goes, did I ever ask for a house? And he says, instead, I'm going to build your house. Talking about your descendants. Okay. But then he says, look, you're a man of war. You're a man of bloodshed. Your hands have spilt blood. You will not build me my house. But your son will be a man of peace, and he will build me my house. It took 7 years to build the temple. Okay. However, the interesting thing with that is there's a couple of things that it brings up. So they would go outside of the city and they would quarry granite. They'd go out and dig granite slabs, cut granite slabs, and bring them back to the temple. It says that their stonework was so perfect that you never heard a hammer cutting stone within the city of Jerusalem. Wow. Because the stones were cut perfectly at the quarry.
That's pretty crazy.
Mm-hmm. Well, and God had a hand in it. So Solomon builds the temple. And if you'll recall, in 2 Chronicles and then in 2 Kings as well, both of these fit into this. We have this moment where Solomon dedicates the temple. And he says, look, let this place be the place where your name dwells. And when somebody looks to this place and asks for forgiveness, may you repent. Okay. But Solomon, later in his life, he made some errors in the way he did things. And the main one was, and this is how the Bible says it, he had a few too many wives.
And lots of horses, right?
And lots of horses. Okay. So he had 300 wives and 700 concubines or something like that. Somewhere over 1,000 women.
Did they all live?
We don't know. It doesn't say.
I can't believe that these women
Okay.
live together.
I don't think that would be.
And get along, yeah.
Yeah.
But what ended up happening, and remember that part of this comes into a very important element of this. Solomon began to, and this is certainly part of this discussion, he began to act like all the other kings. And many of these marriages were not marriages for marriage's sake. They were marriages where this king goes, hey, let's make a treaty, and in fulfillment of the treaty here, marry my daughter. Well, many of these wives were idol worshipers. And so Solomon, in order to make his wives happy, built pagan altars for his wives. And
which
so,
is why God said, don't marry any of these women.
And also why he said, don't marry a bunch of women.
Also,
okay, now
you got lots of different things.
Now, understand that in some ways he did the exact same thing his dad did, only to a much greater extent. David had 9 or 10 wives.
Wow.
Okay. Now, some of them are rather interesting discussion. He had married Saul's daughter. Okay. Then the wife of Nabal, he marries her. Then Bathsheba. And then there are 2 or 3 others. I don't remember the total number, but there are quite a few. Okay. Now, the idea, though, is that Solomon comes to a point where he stops being completely faithful to the Lord. Okay. Because of that, God says, I'm going to tear a part of the kingdom away from Solomon. Now, it's clear the way this works. Solomon, because he wasn't faithful, lost 10 of the tribes. The other 2 tribes, which is Judah and Benjamin, stay with him because of David. He says, I won't tear it all away because I promised David I wouldn't. And he turns over 10 of the tribes to a man named Jeroboam. Now, Solomon dies. His son, whose name was Rehoboam, okay, becomes king.
Okay.
The children of Israel come to him and say, look, Solomon was pretty rough on us on the tax front. Would you lighten the load a little? Okay. And if so, then we'll follow you. But we would like for you to let us know that you're going to lower the tax rate, lower our burden, lower all. Now, all of those things are involved in the process of the level of growth and the level of prosperity under Solomon's reign. Solomon built all sorts of stuff. He started tariffs. Israel became rich under Solomon. Okay. But they're like, look, we would like a break from some of the taxes. Rehoboam has 2 sets of advisors. He has an older set of advisors that were probably advisors under his dad that said, that's a really good idea. We have plenty of money. You could lighten the load and they'll all follow you. And then he had a bunch of his buddies
that were like, no,
who were like, and their idea was, they're just trying to lessen your power. And so he comes out and he goes, where Solomon put a little finger on you, I'm going to sit on you. You thought it was heavy under Solomon. I'm going to make it way worse. So 10 of the tribes leave and go with Jeroboam because God had given it to him. Now, here's the funny part. Jeroboam comes to a point of having a choice. God has given him those 10 tribes. But Jeroboam gets a bit paranoid about the fact that, well, but if all the Israelites still have to go into Judah to worship, then they'll decide to turn back to Judah. But here's the thing. What it really comes down to is he didn't trust God to keep his kingdom. So he says, I've got to have a place to worship here. And so he chooses two places in the northern kingdom, one in Samaria and one in the far north. And he builds a set of golden cows.
Oh my gosh. They weren't calves, they were calves.
Well, I think it's calves. I think it is calves. A set of golden calves.
Like, no, not the killing calf again.
So, in Kings, you have for every single king of Judah and every single king of Israel, you have a discussion of who they were in relationship with God. Okay. You have a number of the kings of Judah who are called, who say they walked in the ways of their father David and did what was right in the sight of the Lord. Okay. In the northern kingdom, you never have a single one who is called righteous. They all do evil in the sight of the Lord. The funny part of that is that it almost appears, and it's certainly probably the most likely discussion here, is how does that work? This passage right here. Every single king in the northern kingdom continued the sin of Jeroboam, at least. Okay, if nothing else, they continued worshiping the golden calves in the northern kingdom. So what did this short little statement say? You will come and worship in the place where the Lord has chosen to call his name. Well, where was that?
Not
the temple in Jerusalem.
Yeah, in Jerusalem.
Okay. The kings in the southern kingdom who are called righteous clearly worship the Lord in the temple as they were supposed to. The kings who are called wicked in the southern kingdom, it will usually say they sought after the Baals and the Ashtaroths and all of that. So the entire book of Kings, the determining factor of whether they were righteous or whether they were wicked was where they chose to worship. Is whether they worshiped in the place where God had told them to and followed God, then they were a good and righteous king. If they worshiped the idols and the pagan gods.
That makes sense. But I got a question.
Okay.
And I know like we don't really have an answer to this.
Okay.
Question. This is a question that doesn't have an answer. If you would have built a temple there instead of two golden calves, maybe put two temples there, would that have changed? Yeah. No, because it is not where God had said, right?
So notice, and by the way, this is part of this discussion. Okay. But you shall seek the place where the Lord your God will choose out of all your tribes to put his name and make his habitation there.
Okay.
Okay. So I will mention there is a place later where all the tribes of Israel get mad at the tribe of Dan because Dan built an altar. Okay. And the rest of the tribes go to sack Dan because they built an altar. And Dan goes, no, we didn't build an altar to sacrifice. We bought an altar to remember what. So understand, this is part of that. You do not build an altar in which to sacrifice.
But you could build an altar to remember.
To remember.
As remembered.
Okay, because remember, there are places all over the promised land where they stacked rocks in order to remember God.
Yeah.
But as far as the sacrifices to the Lord.
And that's where the others went wrong.
Right.
That. Okay.
Okay.
That and God didn't say build me a house here.
Okay.
Which, and now that I think of it, makes a lot of sense because that would mean all these other tribes had to journey to this one place, and that in itself is a remembrance of wandering the desert and being obedient.
But it also is so there is also this idea that the pagans would just build altars in every town for their gods.
Yeah.
Okay. So every town had its own image, had its own god, had its own. Okay. So look at Greek culture later. Okay. Athens. Okay. Well, who was the patron god of Athens? Actually, it's goddess.
Aphrodite?
Athena.
Oh.
That's why it's called Athens.
Oh, that's right. Aphrodite
Okay.
was Egypt chick.
Then you have another that was Poseidon was their god.
Okay.
Okay. And then you had another that Aphrodite was their god and blah, 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 their patron god. Okay. But in Athens, you had the biggest temple was to Athena, but you also had a temple to all the other little gods.
That would be so confusing.
Okay. In fact, remember that in Athens in the New Testament, when Paul shows up in Athens, he gives this speech and he goes, I can tell you guys are really religious because you've got like 1,000 temples. And he goes, in fact, up to and including the point that you have a temple in Athens that's a temple to any gods we missed.
Any gods we might have forgotten, here's your temple.
If we forgot you, here's your temple. And Paul uses that and says, so now he says, here's this temple to a God we don't know, is how it's actually phrased. And he goes, so now let me make you known. Because he's the one true God who created heaven and earth and okay. That was a pagan idea. Okay. So remember, and this is an important part of this, that we spent a large amount of time between Exodus and here beating Egypt out of these people. Okay. But that is a major element in all of this.
And it didn't even work.
It didn't even work. So the idea is you are to be different because the Egypt would have been much like what Greece was later. They would have had an altar on every street corner. And you'd walk by the temple of Heth, and that may not be the right way to phrase that, but the temple of Heth, and you'd burn a little incense for Heth, and then you'd go by down over here to Bob, in the temple of Bob, and you'd burn a little incense for him. Because you want them all to like you.
Yeah. So you could basically just light incense as you're walking down the street and all these stuff.
Allowing an altar everywhere for Almighty God
makes them commonplace.
Would make it almost the same as what all the pagans had.
That makes sense.
So don't do that.
Do that.
Okay. Come to the place that I've chosen. Now, that's the other element of this too. For the idols, I choose where the altar is. You choose where the altar is. This says, come to the place that I choose. So you don't get to choose the place. I choose the place. Okay. There you'll bring your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, the contributions that you present, your vows, your free will offerings, the firstborn of your herd and your flock. And there you shall eat before the Lord your God. Now remember, what we're talking about is the fellowship offering. If you come in to wherever the tabernacle is with a free will offering that you are going to fellowship with the Lord, then you ate that just outside the tabernacle. That was where you came for worship for
fellowship.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, which is why Jesus gets so mad that they're like selling stuff up in
It's a place of prayer and worship, not a place to sell
and barter.
Not a marketplace. Okay. So, and then it goes on, it says, You shall not do according to all that we are doing here today, everyone doing what is right in his own eyes. Okay. For you have not as yet come to the rest and to the inheritance that the Lord your God is giving you. Okay. So, in other words, even more so, worship will look different when you get into the land and find rest. Okay. Because right now,
And that's what he's preparing.
right. Right now, the tabernacle's among them.
Yeah. And God's been among all of them this whole time.
Okay. So when you go over the Jordan and live in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to inherit, and when he gives you rest from all your enemies around so that you live in safety, then to the place that the Lord your God will choose to make his name dwell there, there you shall bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, and the contributions that you present, and all your finest vow offerings that you vow to the Lord. You shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your sons and your daughters, your male servants and your female servants, and the Levite that is within your town, since he has no portion or inheritance with you. Take care that you do not offer your burnt offerings at any place that you see, but at the place that the Lord will choose in one of your tribes. There you shall offer your burnt offerings, and there you shall do all that I am commanding you. So notice, the tabernacle is in their midst now, so they can just come up to the tabernacle anytime. Well, when they get rest, then they are going to have some distance. Okay. But it goes further. However, okay, so here we have a however. You may slaughter and eat meat with any of your towns as much as you desire, according to the blessing of the Lord your God that he has given you. Now, so what this seems to indicate is that for the most part, while they were wandering in the wilderness, the animals that they used to eat were sacrificed to the Lord.
Yes, but now any animal they can eat.
So, and understand, that's kind of an understandable thing. They're traveling. They spend all their time traveling, and they're eating manna, and they're getting quail. And we know they had livestock.
Yeah.
And they're sacrificing livestock. So when they'd sacrifice a cow for a free will offering, then they got to have beef that meal, and it wasn't quail, just quail and manna.
Yeah.
Okay. When they get into the land and the manna stops, he's saying, you can have meat. You don't have to. And this is what it's saying. You don't have to travel to the tabernacle in order to have a meat dish.
Oh, that makes sense.
You can't sacrifice it to the Lord.
But you can eat it.
But you can kill an animal to eat.
Awesome.
Okay. Now, this is another discussion of the difference between them and the pagans. Because by having an altar everywhere, when you were wanting to have meat for a meal, you'd go offer it to your pagan god and then go eat it.
Yeah.
Well, don't act like the pagans.
Don't act like
you can kill the animal and eat it, but don't offer it to a god.
Yeah. Just kill it and eat it.
Okay. The unclean and the clean may eat of it. So now this is the other discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. So what does unclean mean?
Unclean means like you got like a skin thing, or
you touched a dead body,
or you rode your period or something like that.
So what this is saying is these animals that you have slaughtered for a meal,
anybody can
that has not been offered to God specifically, then the clean rules do not apply.
Gotcha.
So if you go out and pull one of your, and it brings up a gazelle or a deer, a wild animal.
Wild animal.
Okay. But it would also include killing one of your sheep or cow or whatever for the purpose of eating it without it being offered to the Lord God. Then you don't have to go, oh, but you touch that dead body, you're unclean, you can't have any.
Yeah, everybody can eat it.
It is not,
Oh, because they have to touch the dead body.
it's not, well, it's not set apart to God. The animal is not set apart to God, so anybody can eat it. Okay. Now, it does say, only you shall not eat the blood. Now, we've talked about this, right? You shall pour it out on the earth like water. Okay. So, and typically with wild animals, what do? You kill a wild animal, you string it up, head down, cut the neck, and let the blood drain out.
Yep. Then you
Okay.
split it down his belly and drop its guts out.
Right. Okay. Now, he goes on, you may not eat within your town the tithes of your grain or of your wine or of your oil or of the firstborn of your herd or of your flock.
So everything that belongs to the Lord.
Everything that should be offered to the Lord, you need to go in and
take to the
Lord.
Gotcha.
Okay. So
18.
I missed, sorry, there it is. Thank you. But you shall eat them before the Lord your God in the place that the Lord your God will choose. You and your son and your daughter, your male servant and your female servant, and the Levite who is within your town. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God in all that you undertake. Take care that you do not neglect the Levite as long as you live in your land. Okay.
They get no inheritance.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. When the Lord your God enlarges your territory as he has promised you, and you say, I'll eat meat because I crave meat. Okay. That's all. Yeah, I'm hungry for meat.
Yep.
I want a steak tonight.
Yep. I want a steak.
You may eat meat whenever you desire. If the place that the Lord your God will choose to put his name there is too far from you, then you may kill any of your herd or your flock which the Lord has given you, as I have commanded you, and you may eat within your towns whenever you desire. Just as the gazelle or the deer is eaten, so you may eat of it. Okay, now let me make sure you understand, because this is part of the discussion and part of the reason why he brings up the gazelle and the deer. The gazelle and the deer are clean animals.
Yeah, it doesn't mention.
But they are not suitable for sacrifice.
Oh, because it has to be certain animals for sacrifice.
Right. So remember, we talked about this when we got into Numbers and early in Deuteronomy. There are actually 3 tiers. There is unclean. Don't eat of it. Don't touch it. Leave it alone as much as is possible.
Yeah.
Then you have the clean animals.
Yeah.
Which you can eat.
And sacrifice.
Well, not necessarily.
Oh.
Okay, that you can eat. And then you have the sacrificial animals.
Does the gazelle fall in the clean? Just
the gazelle and the deer are clean, but you cannot use them as a sacrifice.
God,
You can eat them.
but you
can eat them.
Yeah, and bacon's not on that list.
Okay. But watch how Moses is handling this, because this is the idea. I want meat, but I don't have time, or I can't this day travel all the way to the tabernacle. Okay.
Yeah.
Then just treat it as if it's a clean animal.
Yep.
And just go ahead and slaughter it for the purpose of eating it. It's not a sacrifice to God. It is simply a meal. Okay. That is why he's bringing this up. Only be sure you do not eat the blood, for the blood is the life, and you shall not eat the life with the flesh. You shall not eat it. You shall pour it out on the earth like water. Okay, so once again, you shall not eat it, talking about the blood once again, that all may go well with you and your children after you when you do what is right in the sight of the Lord. But the holy things that are due from you, your vow offerings, Those you shall take, and when you go to the place that the Lord your choose, and offer your burnt offerings, the flesh and the blood on the altar of the Lord your God. The blood of your sacrifices shall be poured out on the altar of the Lord your God, but the flesh you may eat. Be careful to obey all these words that I command you, that it may go well with you and with your children after you forever, when you do what is good and right in the sight of the Lord your God. Okay. So you can have meat, but make sure that if it's something you're supposed to give to God, you give it to God.
Yeah, and don't eat that.
Mm-hmm.
Go hunt you something or something.
Okay. Now, verse 29. Did you have a question?
I did.
Okay.
Okay, just like I've heard of stuff called blood pudding. I
Okay.
used to want to try it. Is it really made of blood?
Yes.
Oh, well, then I guess that's off the list. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
That was the question. 'Cause
Now-
we're talking about
Now, I
blood.
will say that is a Jewish dietary rule. Okay.
Yeah.
I still don't think it's very appetizing. And okay.
Don't even sound very happy.
But they also have blood sausage.
See,
Okay. There are cultures that that don't drain the blood from their meat before they eat it. Now, understand, and I want to make sure I say this, okay? When you think of American beef
processed food.
or any of that, okay? And I go get a steak and it's red and I cook it and I cut it open, it's still a little pink in the middle and this light red pulls out. That is not blood. That is not what that is.
Okay, because I
Okay.
was always assuming that's
American
blood.
meat processing follows typically the idea of that you
Drain the meat.
kill the animal, you drain the blood as much as possible, and then you butcher it. And there are some sanitary reasons for that, especially with the fact that it is refrigerated, frozen, transported, all of that.
Yeah.
Okay. That is not blood. There's
Okay.
actually another word for it, and I don't remember what it is right off the top of my head. But
Okay.
that is not blood. Okay. But the idea here, okay, in European, and it's European countries, Eastern countries, some of those, they do eat meat with the blood in it, and they actually use the blood for things.
Like that's why I wanted to know about blood pudding. It
Yeah.
was actually
Mhm.
made with real blood.
German.
That's a German thing.
Not so much anymore. It was a very German thing before Christianity really moved into Germany. But that is a different thing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Now, verse 29, when the Lord your God cuts off before you the nations that you go in to dispossess, okay, and you dispossess them and dwell in their land, take care that you not be ensnared to follow them after they have been destroyed before you, and that you do not inquire about their gods, saying, well, how did these nations serve their gods, that I may do the same? Okay. Shall not worship the Lord your God in that way, for every abominable thing that the Lord hates, they have done for their gods. Now watch, because here we go. For they have even burned their sons and their daughters in the fire to their gods. Everything that I command you, you shall be careful to do. You shall not add to it or take away from it.
Can't imagine anybody sacrificing a kid.
I know, I can.
But it was common,
Yeah.
Like,
common. Okay. So we talk about one of the kings, Josiah. Okay. Josiah was probably the greatest king of Judah as far as returning to the Lord. Okay. His grandfather sacrificed one of Josiah's uncles to Molech.
wow.
Manasseh was one of the kings of Judah, and he sacrificed his own son on the fire of Molech. Now the story goes, and by the way, there are two elements here. So in Kings, it just tells us how evil Manasseh was. Okay. In Chronicles, it tells us that Manasseh started out so evil that God finally sent him off into captivity. And he lost the kingdom for a period. While he was in captivity, he came to his senses and he came back to Jerusalem and tried to undo a lot of the evils he had done. Okay. When Manasseh dies, his son Ammon becomes king and goes right back to what Manasseh was doing before he turned. And when Ammon dies, Josiah becomes king at 8 years old. And he followed the Lord. He had I think it's an aunt or a tutor, I can't remember which one it is, that taught him the ways of the Lord, and he followed the Lord. And after about 10 years into his reign, he decides that he wants to rebuild the temple of the Lord because it had really gone downhill. It needed some serious maintenance. Kind of joking, almost like our school right now. But it had fallen into disrepair, so let's fix it. While they're fixing it, the priests walk into one of the storerooms and find a scroll, probably of Deuteronomy, and come back to Josiah and go, you need to read this. And so Josiah goes in and reads the scroll, okay, and is so cut to the heart by the scroll that he begins a movement that lasts for several years, where he literally goes throughout all of Jerusalem and even into what was Samaria. So at this point, Samaria is gone. The northern kingdom's already off in exile. He actually goes into Samaria and starts cutting down all the poles, breaking all the altars. In fact, there's a story from the reign of Ahab. I think it's all the way back that far. I would have to look because Ahab's northern kingdom, so it may not be right. A prophet comes to tell one of the kings, you need to stop what you're doing. And as he's leaving, another guy comes and gives him a false prophecy. Okay, so the prophet's going off and God has told him, you go straight home. Yeah. Don't stop. Don't take a meal here. Nothing. Just leave. And another guy comes and says, well, I'm a prophet too, and God has told me to tell you to come have food at our house. And the guy goes and does that. And as he's leaving the guy's house, a lion attacks him and kills him. The prophet. So the false prophet says, well, let's bury him. And then when I die, I want you to bury me in the same grave. He has a real prophecy that my bones might not be disturbed. Well, Josiah is going through and he's desecrating every altar. He's desecrating all the pagan burial sites and all of this. And he comes to this one and they say, well, a man of God who prophesied back here was, and Josiah goes, okay, so leave it alone. And so that guy's bones don't get disturbed because he buried himself in the same hole as a man of God. But Josiah completely destroys pagan worship during his reign.
That's pretty awesome.
Now, the sad part is they had already gone so far that God goes, I know that you've done well for me and I appreciate it. I'm still going to destroy Judah, but I'll wait till after you die.
Because he was on fire for the
Because
Lord.
he had, okay.
Gone and tried to correct all the
right.
Past issues.
But understand that there is a major element within this that says God takes this very seriously. And when you begin to worship idols, when you begin to stray from the commandments and the criteria of the way God wants to be worshiped, then there are consequences. And as we watch Israel, there is a level at which we see God's consequences, but we also see a glimpse of what is happening in our own nation. Okay. So let me just say this in complete honesty. It appears, and I'll bring it up. I'll bring up where I'm getting this from. There's a set of books that I've been working through on some of the prophetic things that have been going on in the U.S. And it is almost certain to make this case that the child sacrifice of the Old Testament and our abortion of today look the same in God's eyes.
Yeah, I believe
That's
that.
what she's talking about this morning.
So guess what?
I believe that.
I don't believe that God would look the other way as we have murdered 60 million children in the last 50 years. Okay. Now we're going to stop there. We will pick up on chapter 13 next time.